It's a message they should have been hearing for about the last 70 years. As members of NATO, the British Army should have been prepared to fight and win on European soil throughout that time.
Is he likely to find himself having a row with the Secretary of State for Defence about the size of the British Army?
Well, I think when the Army works out what it's for, then it can talk about the numbers and the size it wants to be. Because right now, I don't think the Army has a coherent doctrine for future operations. I think Patrick Sanders' words are a good start because it reaffirms that we're back into great power competition, and they've got over the 20-year aberration of operating in Afghanistan and Iraq. If we'd gone ahead with the 1998 defence review, the Army would be in much better shape for the sort of wars that it thinks it might have to deter and fight in the 21st century.
For those of us who didn't read it, Chris, what was it? What was the 98 plan?
Well, the 98 plan basically said what the recent integrated review said, and that said that our predominant interest as the United Kingdom is to be predominantly a maritime country, which has an expeditionary capability with regard to the continent of Europe. And I'm afraid all that got dashed by this adventure that we undertook in Afghanistan and the other one in Iraq. And I'm afraid to say that for most of the sort of recent CGSs, we've been hearing that, Afghanistan and Iraq would be typical of the next 50 years. Those of us who aren't Army officers and those of us that have I would say, a more strategic approach, knew that there would be no public or political appetite for that sort of thing, and have been warning about the return of Russia and the rise of China for quite some time. It seems that the Army has finally got the message and is gearing itself up for what I call peer and peer plus conflict. That's good news, but whether they're going to fight on the continent of Europe is a different matter altogether. I believe we should leave land fighting on the continent of Europe to those that need to do it and those that do it best.
Chris Parry, what would you say to those who will argue, not least ex-soldiers, who will say, well, there you go, there's a Royal Navy man arguing for a relatively big Navy compared to a relatively small Army?
Yeah, I mean, I've had cheap shots like that for most of my career. I've had 5 joint jobs. I believe in having strong armed forces across the board. But the fact of life is, until the Army can tell us what it's for, whether it's to fight Russia or China or to do a range of other jobs, there's no point in arguing about numbers or indeed the equipment that it wants. Right now, we're looking at a war in Ukraine, which effectively is the last 20th century war. And we need to look ahead now and see what sort of wars are going to have to be deterred and fought in the 21st century. And I'm afraid to say that I've heard a number of Army officers, senior Army officers over the last few weeks saying, well, here we go. Ukraine proves that actually my agenda, which involves going back into the womb as far as the Army is concerned, is justified. It isn't. There are a lot of new lessons to be learned in Ukraine, but actually there are a lot of old things that we will leave behind us in future.